And they lost around 90% of their population in what they call the Great Dying. So they can't defend themselves against their rivals, the Narragansetts. And apologies if I'm getting some of these names wrong. And the settlers...
Wait, Narragansett, are those the Narragansett?
That's a tribe.
Okay, right. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so it's the primary rival of the Wampanoags.
Gotcha.
At the time,
okay.
Right? So they can't defend themselves against them because they just lost 90% of their population to this epidemic. But the settlers can't defend or feed themselves that first year. So in exchange for a unified defense, the Wampanoag taught the English how to hunt, plant crops, and harvest so they didn't starve to death. And that lasted for about as long as the settlers needed it to, because for the next 50 years, the alliance was consistently violated by colonists as they expanded their footprint, which spread disease and exhausted their surrounding resources. Eventually, the chief's son took over, and not surprisingly, he felt like the alliance maybe was being taken advantage of, if there was even an alliance at all. Right? He didn't really feel like the settlers, or the colonists at this point, were honoring what they had agreed to at all. And that kind of led to the relationships souring a little bit. So you can imagine that perhaps a unified defense was no longer needed by the colonists, and that they most likely didn't need to be taught how to survive anymore. So that whole containment of the original agreement probably seemed unnecessary to the colonists. And they felt like they could kind of do whatever they want. I mean, they went there and they probably had that attitude. We can probably relate to that to some degree. In fact, it might have even been a version of Manifest Destiny that we covered in a previous episode, where they saw it as their mission in life to expand across this new land. So that brings us to 1675. Colonists demand that the Wampanoag turn over all of their guns and hung 3 men from the tribe for the murder of one of their colonists that told the Plymouth colony that the tribe was planning an attack. And for the Wampanoag and community, that was the last straw. The Wampanoag refused and united with the surrounding tribes, including the Narragansett. And this uprising is known as King Philip's War, or the Great Narragansett War.
Now, King Philip's War is funny because I feel like you hear about that, or either maybe it's been referenced in a Disney movie or something, but I feel like that gets referenced a lot. The problem with American history is that we definitely gloss over these quite quickly. You know, the French and Indian War, you hear about it for like a segment, you know, it's like 2 weeks, you study it and then it just goes away. This is one of those, like you hear about, oh yeah, King Philip War. I mean, it resonates. Like I'm like, I've heard of this war before, but I could not tell you what it was about. I couldn't tell you when it occurred. And I guess that's what you're helping fill in right now, is a little bit of some of these gaps. Because I consider myself a person who likes history, but I'll be honest. I mean, yeah, some of this, the early American settler history, is probably some of my least favorite. To me, it usually feels a little dry, but it's only dry probably because of the way that we talk about it, where we're not talking about it from the vantage point of the people that are actually being abused. You know, it seems dry if you're just talking about a bunch of pilgrims that are seeking religious a lift of religious persecution, and then they just taught about, you know, have a dinner with a couple of native peoples, and then I guess go on their merry way doing their own religious thing until like, you know, the start of the
the interesting parts of history.
Go on.
Yeah, but the interesting parts of history, and it's, you know, maybe a sad statement, it would be great if they were amazing achievements. That does happen, and those are things that we celebrate. But generally, the things that humans are drawn to about history is the violence, is the war, is the conquering, right? Those are the things that get documented, especially by the winners.
Absolutely. But
again, the problem here,
this is still a war.
Is that this is our history, and this is still very ongoing. And the people that would have suffered if we start to learn about the true history here, they're still around. Right. They still live here. We still have responsibilities and obligations to them. So I think that you probably find the history uninteresting because things are being intentionally left out because we don't want to be accountable.
Absolutely. Oh, without a doubt. Completely agree.
So another interesting fact about King Philip's War, because I certainly didn't know this, maybe you did, is that Philip is actually the name that the Europeans call the chief.
I did not
I,
know. I
I
didn't
just
know
thought King
that.
Philip was some
I
dude
thought
in
it was
Europe.
a dude in Europe.
Yeah, no, they I guess they,
See?
they're
That's
like,
what I'm
I
saying.
hear what you say your name is, but we're gonna call you Philip, and they call him King Philip, and that's King Philip's
Wow.
War. Isn't that
Okay.
crazy?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I had no idea. If someone had asked me just to venture a guess, I would have said, I don't know, some sort of monarch in Europe decided to claim something and, decided, that there was a war for it, but never in a million years would I have thought that King Philip was like a chief of one of the tribes. Never in a
What I
million
read.
years.
If I got that wrong, folks, let me know. Happy to retract it, but that's what I understood
Well, I hope
from
you didn't
the
get that wrong. I
literature.
mean, it's like the quintessential positioning of the story you're trying to tell. I hope you're right here.
I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Okay, all right.
But when
enough.
something is so shocking, you do feel a little bit of doubt.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
no, without a doubt. Yeah.
all right. So the war, King Philip's War. This is the uprising. This is the Native Americans saying with one voice, no. And for the next 14 months, colonists burned villages and thousands of indigenous people were killed and sold into slavery, including women and children. In the end, the tribes lost. They were defeated. And the Wampanoag chief was hanged, drawn and quartered, and his head was placed on a spike at Plymouth Colony for 2 decades. I wonder if they have that on the tour.
No. I'm definitely gonna say. I mean, it's horrible to laugh at something. You're laughing out of nervousness.
Yeah, it is.
The idea. Did you just say for 2 decades?
2 decades.
That is crazy. I mean,
the only thing I can think of
happened,
that popped into my head was the city of Munster in Germany.
Yeah.
Do you remember I showed you that one time, the cages that they had hanging for the people that they put there, and the cages are still there today? I mean, they don't have the rotting dead corpses in there, but I think they kept those in there for a long time. But that's the only thing that I could be like, okay, like there's another human behavior that does something horrific. But can you imagine head on a spike for 2 decades? That's crazy.
I mean, what a statement to the surrounding, the remnants or the leftover, the people who basically survive. I mean, Jesus, you have to watch that. I mean, you can't even imagine having to live with that kind of, open humiliation. Not from losing. I'm just saying, like the fact that you're not. It's the winners are never gracious. How about that? They're never like, yeah, we've won, but there's some. It's always like we're gonna step on your throat. It's like not only did we defeat you, but we want to humiliate you for as long as possible. Which is that seems to be the nature of mankind. I do feel like there is a question to be asked here. The pilgrims, they're never. And this is what I think is really funny. Are they still pilgrims at this point? Like, or were they still considered the pilgrims? Like, was this their religious doctrine? They're still pilgrims, or is this like more Europeans have come over and like expanded the colony, or
I mean, they're settlers, right?
It's more
like the nature of their mission.
Right. Okay.
Once they're here and the generations are here,
That's what I'm
and
asking.
new waves come over, are they really pilgrims on a literal journey? I didn't
mean it. I didn't mean it for that. Well, when we call them pilgrims, it's not in like the the colloquialism of I don't know, pilgrimage to Mecca or something of that nature, like some sort of like a journeyman connotation. I always thought that the pilgrims in this like place in this time in history were a certain religious sect that was fleeing from Europe, or they might have a different like a real historical different name, like maybe pilgrims is like something that was like colloquially.
Well, they're like Puritans, right? I mean,
well, that's what I'm asking. Yeah, or are they? I'm just saying. I don't know. I actually don't know much about this part of history.
Yeah,
so
they're Protestant.
Puritans. They're Protestant. They're just Protestants. They're okay.
Yeah,
so
they're like
Catholic
Puritans, but they're like this sect that broke away.
Right.
Now they're like protesting in their Protestants.
Right. That's what I thought. But the thing is, in our history books, I don't think there's ever a point. And here, we're older. I hope maybe today kids are learning something a little different, but they're definitely never depicted as being particularly violent in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that it's always looked at as some sort of like peaceful religious exodus because
except for those witch hunts. The witch
no,
hunts
well, I
didn't
mean,
do him
yeah,
any favors.
well, those were Salem were, yeah, I guess you're right. Those are purists too. Yeah, I mean, there is violence later, but I'm just saying in this period, like no one puts the Pilgrims as like a warring faction or someone who is willing
that's
to
not.
have a war,
I could
right?
see that, but they were at war with the Native Americans. Like they.
Well, that's what, yeah. I mean, that's what we know today. I mean, that's the true history of it. I'm just saying that when we do,
but I'm saying like you
parade,
could shatter it instantly just with logic and say, well, if they had a unified defense with the Wampanoag against the Wampanoag's chief rivals, clearly they were a violent people because they would have had to been at war with the rivals.
It's just not. I'm just saying, like even in the imagery, even in the cartoon imagery, in the illustrations, I mean, they're always depicted as these guys with like white long stockings and like
the buckle on their
hats. I mean.
Yeah,
they're never depicted as people who were like picking up guns and going to war. That's what they're not depicted as soldiers. They're depicted as, like I said, like almost like in a pacifist type of, like of painting. You know, like I feel like they're always painted as like you would assume. I think if you asked your average American, hey, were the Pilgrims pacifists, without giving any kind of historical context or talking about anything else, just in like the knee jerk because of the way our education system is framed, I think most Americans, obviously not as long as you're not a native person, most, other Americans might just say, like without thinking, they'll just be like, oh, of course the Pilgrims were pacifists. I mean, they were all about peace. I mean, that's why they sat down to enjoy that meal with these people.
We'll get into the myths of it all.
Just saying, that's wild.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's a good call out. I mean, that's kind of what the point of this episode is to deconstruct our modern tradition, to understand what's real, what isn't, and where it came from and why.